And welcome back to my channel. So starting with this video, I am going to create a playlist on Azure DevOps. So if you are seeking to learn DevOps, then I think, and that too, with Azure, then I believe that this playlist is going to help you at least to get started and in order to understand each and every aspect of Azure DevOps. So first thing first, if you already know what DevOps mean and what is a DevOps teams work, what they actually do. If you are already aware of all those things, then this video is not for you. You can start watching from video number 2. All right, so this is only for the people who don't have an idea on what is a DevOps and what is the basic a work of a DevOps team. All right, so let's just go ahead and have a look at the agenda. So I'm going to discuss about what is DevOps, and then we'll also discuss about why do we need DevOps, then benefits of DevOps, and if you should learn it or not. All right. So, guys, before I get started, I want to share some experiences. So, before creating this video, I wanted to I was Googling a lot of things that, what is the best way that I can create a content and I can, put everything together so that you will be able to understand what a DevOps is. And trust me, just by looking at the theory or looking at the articles, it's not really possible to have an overview, like a 360-degree overview of what actually a DevOps team does. All right. So I would rather explain you with my own experience, the projects that I've been. So I'm a developer, but I have worked in small projects and big projects, and I exactly know what a DevOps team does. So I would, rather than just explaining you the definition, I would rather share my experience. And I am pretty sure, I'm not just a little sure, but I'm 100% sure that after the stories that I tell you, you will definitely understand what a DevOps is. Okay. So, first of all, in order to understand everything that I just said, first of all, you should be aware of how a software development works. Okay. So I believe that if you have worked in any project or if you have done engineering in your college, right, you would have seen this model of SDLC, software development lifecycle, right? So let's say if you are in any project, how everything starts, it starts with requirement gathering, right? That there will be a client and the project you will be working on, so you will gather the requirement from the client and you will do a requirement analysis, right? For example, whether whatever they are asking, it is feasible or it is doable or not, right? Once you're done with the requirement gathering or requirement analysis, you will and there will be architectures in your team who will be actually designing the whole module or the project, or as per the requirement they will basically design or create a blueprint of how things should be developed and how they should actually look to the user. All right. And then once everything is designed, the real development, or you can say implementation, start, where this is where the development teams comes into picture, right? The guys who actually basically code, right? You will code and you will implement all the requirements that are there. And once the this particular implementation part or development part is done, you will unit test your code, right? Because once, if you are doing any kind of development, you will obviously test, right, whether it's working or not, correct? And once it is, you're sure that it is working, you will basically deploy that code to some other environment where the QA team, or you can say the testing team of your project, can actually do a quality analysis, right? Because you would have known, right? Let's say if you are working on something and if you yourself test it, right, then there might be scenarios positive scenario, or even let it be a negative scenario, which because you have done on you have worked on something, you might be not able to have that extra point of view which another team can actually have at your developed code, and they can figure out that what is actually wrong or what is missing, right? That is why every project generally, I mean, if you are in a big company, you will definitely see a separate team which are called QA team, or you can say testing team. They actually validate your development against the requirement that is that was actually logged, right? So they make sure that whatever was the requirement, everything that was built by you, if it is working as per the requirement or not, right? That is the job of a testing team. All right. And then after that comes the maintenance part. Maintenance is something when the code is already deployed to, let's say, user acceptance environment, or let's say even to the live environment, the production environment. And let's say if there is anything comes which a user says that, you know what, no, this is not how it should work, it should work in a different way, then those kind of things that again come back to the analysis part. And every cycle, everything goes in this particular cycle. All right. So I think this is just the basic idea of any kind of software development that actually works. Now it depends that what kind of methodology your project is following. It could be a waterfall, it could be a agile. So in agile, I have been working in agile for so long, so I would, whatever I'm going to explain, I'll be explaining you keeping agile methodology in my mind. All right. So agile is something that is known for faster development. So basically, whatever the requirement that you gather, right, that requirement is broken down into chunks. Okay. And based on the priority, not exactly on the priority, but dependency, right, whatever needs to be built first, and then what is the second chunk that can be built after the first chunk, right, that kind of dependency, sequential dependency is decided. And while the first chunk development is done, the team, like these kind of, because every step that you're seeing here, right, it is done by different teams, right? So let's say, for example, let's say the requirement gathering is already done, requirement analysis is already done, and there's a design in picture. Okay. But just imagine that the design that you already have is only for one module. Okay. So for one module the design is done and it is given to the development team to start developing. So meanwhile, when the development team is actually developing that first chunk of requirement, what are these two teams going to do? They can work on the second module, right? So that is why agile is much faster, because they just break down the requirements, and then based on the sequence and based on the priority, they design the models and then they pass on to other teams. So here what will happen, the development team will start working on module 1, and they will do their unit testing, they will deploy those requirements, and testing team or QA team can go ahead and start testing it. But meanwhile, when the whole requirement, whatever the development team has worked on, while the QA team is doing a quality analysis, this team will already have the requirement or the design for the module 2, right? Because these teams had already started working on the module 2 design, while the development team working on the module 1 implementation, right? So that is why agile is much faster, because it is, you never build everything at once. All right. So let me just give you an overview what happens in my project. Okay. And similarly, meanwhile I'll explain you the structure that I have in my project. I will also explain you that what is the role in all of these things that DevOps team plays. All right. So I will just go to the notepad, and let me just show you a couple of things. Okay. So all right. Okay. So let's say you started working in a project, okay? So now you know that you have a set of requirement, and let's say you are assigned with one requirement, and your manager or your lead, they came to you and they tell you that this is the requirement that has been assigned to you, and you have to develop code for that, right? So just imagine that if you want to develop something, then where will you develop? There will be one developer environment, right, where all the developers will actually be developing their user stories or their requirement, right? So the first environment that I'm going to talk about is the development environment. Okay. So this is nothing but a dev environment. Let's just call it dev environment. Okay. So here you develop your code. Okay. You develop your code. And once you develop your code, let's say you're working on a requirement, your development is done. So where will you be doing the unit testing? Unit testing means once you have done the development, you yourself will check whether that code is working as per the requirement or not. So in this environment itself, you're going to do the unit testing. All right. So that is step number 1. Now let's say there is second environment. Okay. Let's call it a QA environment, or you can also call it SIT environment, system integration testing. Okay. SIT environment. Here, QA team will perform testing, the quality analysis team. Okay. So any member of the development team will be developing their stories or will be writing their code, and they will keep their code into this environment, okay, dev environment. Now once their development is done, they will do the unit testing in this environment itself, and they'll be like, okay, this requirement is complete, I have developed the code and it is working as expected, okay. But what will happen that there is another environment which is specifically created for testing, okay, so that there is, because there is another team who can perform all the testing without getting disturbed, because in this environment there will be a lot of multiple developers who would be developing multiple stories, right? So this environment is not going to be really stable, right? Because like, if you're developing something in the back end and UI will show something, and let's say on the same module somebody else is working, so this environment is never going to be totally stable for the testing team to actually test a specific module, okay. So that is why we will have a second environment which will be called a QA environment or a site environment, where the QA team, or you can say testing team, will actually perform testing, okay. Now there is a gap here, okay. Gap is that how will you actually deploy, or how will you transfer your code from this environment to this environment, okay. So there will be some kind of deployment practices that you would be following in your project, right? I mean, could be any tool that you would be using. So if I talk about Salesforce has one out of the box feature that is called chain sets, okay. So in chain sets you can actually select the components, or like, your apex classes or apex triggers, whatever you have developed, and you can actually push your code from one environment to other environment. But chain sets, if you already know about chain sets is like, really tiring, okay. So here, let's say, if you just, for now, just imagine, I'm not just actually specifically like, focusing on the Azure DevOps here, but let's say if you have any tool in between, okay, which will actually help you deploy your code to QA environment, okay, this QA environment. Now, this tool is something that, let's say, if you're a developer and you already have a lot of work, right? You have a set of requirements to build, you're developing everything, and then this tool is something that you will also have to learn, or let's say you are the only person who has to, like, deploy your code from this environment to this environment. And trust me, there are projects like, smaller projects, or if you are working on a product based companies, they will not have separate teams, okay. So you will be developing your code, and you also should be having the knowledge of this tool in order to actually deploy your code from this environment to this environment, okay. So basically you are the one who is doing everything. You're developing your code, you're doing the unit testing, and then you are also involved into the deployment procedure, that to deploy your code from this environment to this environment, okay. Now before I actually introduce you to DevOps team here, let's just say now this job is done. The QA team said that, okay, you know what, you developed this requirement, we have tested this requirement into this environment, and everything is working fine. Now let's push this code to another higher environment, okay. So let's say I have a third environment, okay, which is called a UAT environment, okay. Now what is a UAT environment? UAT environment is called user acceptance testing. And let me just write down the fourth environment as well. Fourth environment, which will be nothing but your production live environment, where there are real users who are using the application, okay. Okay. Now your client says that, you know what, whatever you are building in your developer org, whatever you are testing in your QA environment, we don't want that change to be directly deployed to the live environment. We want another environment where real users, a set of real users, not everybody, right? Let's say like, 5 or 10 users. Some real users can actually log in and test those changes that you have actually made, right? So the client, just to be like, more confident, and to avoid any kind of live issues in live environment, they just want to make sure that whatever requirement has been built, whatever changes has been done, they are tested by real users and not the development team or the QA team. Okay, they want their own users to test out those environment, and that is why this environment is in picture. Okay, so once there are set of real users who comes to this environment, test out those requirements, once they say, you know what, everything looks fine, and that is when you actually go ahead and deploy those changes to the production or live environment. Okay, and this kind of this particular, like, this particular deployment is called a release. Okay, all right, release to production. Okay, now just imagine that you being a developer, if you are doing all these activities, right, you are developing the code, and then, like, in between you're also, like, deploying your code, because you will have other requirements also to work on, right? But you also have to deploy your code. You will deploy your code to second environment. Now let's say QA team is reporting something that, you know what, this change is not available, or that change is not available, or there's something that is not working. But you being a developer, you will say, you know what, this is working in my environment, but I'm not sure that why it is not working in QA environment. Basically this kind of monitoring and operations. So just imagine you being a single person, you will just go crazy about it, right? That okay, if, and you will start thinking that, you know what, it would have been better if there is somebody else who can actually monitor these kind of things, and they can do a basic check that why something is not working. Is there a problem with the environment? Is there something which is missing in this environment which was there here? Because everything was working here, right, in dev environment, but it is not working in this environment, correct? So what will you do? Right? The environment spelling is wrong, so please, like, just ignore it. Okay, so what happens in these cases? Okay, and then just imagine again. Let's just not, like, jump to DevOps again. Once let's say QA team says, you know what, everything is fine, now you can deploy the code to UAT. Then you being a developer, again you will have this headache of deploying the code from QA environment to this environment, right, UAT environment. And once all the, like, real users, they do all the testing in UAT environment, they say, you know what, everything is fine. Now all these requirements that is being developed by, that was developed by the development team, now everything can be deployed to the production or live environment. Now again the development team will have this extra work of deploying everything, doing the release to the production environment, right? Just imagine how much work a development team is doing. Okay, and for now I just talked about one requirement, right? But trust me, it's going to be a lot of work if you're working on a bigger project. All right, so what happens that a lot of, like, multinational companies, like, where they are working on a bigger massive projects, they maintain a different team. They have a different team called DevOps team. Okay, so here let me just, DevOps team. Okay, so DevOps team, what they will do, they will, so all you have to do as a developer is develop your code and commit your and push your code to your repository. Okay, so for example, the tool that you are going to use for the DevOps process or procedure, that tool is going to maintain everything. That tool will have a code repository. It will have all the branches as in that particular tool will maintain a code repository, and it will maintain different branches. For example, for this particular environment, it is going to maintain a different branch. Okay, branch SIT, or you can say QA. Okay, so that whatever, like, let's say if there are 10 developers, okay, in the development team, and everybody is working on a different set of requirements. Okay, so all those 10 people will be committing and pushing their code to this particular branch, right? But they will not be actually, so basically let's say if you have developed a requirement, and just imagine that there is something wrong with the, like, code or anything that you have done. Okay, and also just imagine that you only have 1 year of experience as a developer. Okay, and there are team leads of the development team, right? There will be a lead in the development team. Okay, and that lead is saying that, you know what, whatever you are developing, it should not directly go to this branch. Okay, because I wanted to review first. I want to see that if you have followed the best practices, if you have written it in the best way or not, if you have covered everything in the requirement or not. Okay, so they basically want that whatever the development team is building or whatever they are coding, they want to review everything first, and then only they want to give a heads up for the code to be merged into this branch. Okay, because whatever is available into this code repository, the same changes will be reflected on the QA environment. Okay, so in these kind of cases, what will happen, the development team will actually clone this branch. Okay, they will clone this branch. That means they are going to create a replica of this branch. Every developer, if there are five developers, they will clone this branch and they will create their own local branches. Again, if you're not understanding, don't worry, just keep on listening and it will make some sense to you. Okay, so they will clone these branches. If there are five developers, if they have to commit and push some kind of code, they all will be cloning this branch and they will create their own local branch where they can commit and push the code. Okay, and once they have pushed their code to that local branch, access for that local branch, or that change whatever they have done, it will be given to the team lead so that he can see, okay, these are the changes that this particular developer has done. And once he approves it, okay, and all this approval and managing everything will be handled by the tool. So once we actually start learning Azure, you will exactly understand how it's all done. Okay, so don't worry about it. But once the development team leader approves the code, that means that he has given a heads up for that code to be merged into this particular branch. Now who is responsible for merging that code? DevOps team. Okay, who's gonna do that? DevOps team. So developer, the only job for the developer is to develop the requirement, commit and push, and that is it. The development team leader is going to just review that code and he will approve in that tool itself. He doesn't have to manually tell the developer, okay, you know what, everything looks fine, now you can go and ask the DevOps team to merge your code. No, everything is going to be taken care by the tool. It will automatically take care of everything. It's just going to be like a button click. Okay, the team lead can review the code and he can just click on the approve button, and then the DevOps team will be notified that that particular code has been approved, and he can go ahead and merge that code into this main branch of the SIT, or you can call it as QA. Okay, now let's say five people, right? There are five people in the development team, so everybody's code is now approved by the team leader and everything is merged into SIT branch. Okay, but let's say whatever problem comes in between, let's say if whenever they were building their code, let's say if there were any failures or any kind of issues, right, any kind of monitoring works that came along in the picture while building the code and deploying the code, developer don't have to worry about that. DevOps team is going to take care of those things. Okay, so that is point number one. Now again, once everything is in SIT and QA environment, once the QA team says, you know what, everything looks fine, now the code can be deployed to UAT environment. Then who is going to merge all these changes from this branch to another branch? They will maintain on the another branch, right? UAT code repo. Okay. Then who is going to do this? Development team doesn't need to do this. Okay, DevOps team will be doing this. Okay, DevOps team will take care of all the merging activities that needs to be done from this environment to this environment. Okay, so so this particular task will be dedicated for the DevOps team. And again, for every release, and release simply doesn't mean that deploying the code from one repo to another repo. No, there are a lot of activities that is basically involved in the release, right? It could be release notes, it could be some pre-deployment steps, or it could be some post-deployment step. There are a lot of activities that is actually involved in a release. So it is not just deploying the code, there are a lot of other activities that are involved in a particular release, correct? So those kind of activities, DevOps team is going to take care of it. Okay, so that is the main job of the DevOps team. All right, I hope that you got the basic idea. And even here, if there is any kind of uh monitoring that is that is done by the operations team, then the operations team the monitoring is basically the monitoring, or you can say fixing of any kind of issues is collectively done by all the teams. Basically the operations team or the maintenance team, they will inform about any kind of issues, and if that particular issue requires any kind of change or any kind of fix, then development team will be informed, they will fix that code, and then again the same procedure will be followed. Okay, so development team, operations team, and the DevOps team work collectively in all these procedure. All right, so this is the outline of how a project works. Okay, and no matter if you're working in agile environment, or if you're working in, let's say if you're working in waterfall, right, even though everything is built at once, again, like, you have to go through this thing, right? Because if you are developing anything, you cannot just simply deploy your code to the production or live environment, right, directly, because you need to make sure that everything is working fine. And that is why we have these another two environments in between, right? So that your team, your QA team, can test everything if they are, if the requirements are working as per the original requirement or not, right? Whatever you have built, if that is actually meeting the criteria or the requirements that was actually written, correct? And then once that is done, somebody, like, from the client side, someone, like, some real set of users can also test those things, and they, so that, like, they will be more confident about the changes, or, like, the development that you have done. So once everything is done, it's deployed to the live environment. Okay, so this was the outline of how things work. Now let's just go back and let me show you what else I had here. Okay. All right. So this is what, like, development team, quality analysis team, and operations team. And, like, because DevOps is something which is, like, kind of filling in the gaps. Like, once the development is done, how the code is, like, actually going to another environment for the QA team to actually start testing, right? So who is doing that job in between? Like, who is deploying the code? DevOps team, right? And then, like, if the operations team is actually monitoring and, like, doing any kind of, like, maintenance thing for the, like, production, the code that you have deployed in the production, right? That is the work of the operations team. And, like, anything that needs redeployment, or, like, let's say if there is any environmental issues that operations team is informing back, then DevOps team is the one who will have more knowledge about the tools and about the backend of an environment, which actually they can like, analyze and then fix faster, right? Better than the development team and the quality analysis team. All right. And also, DevOps word actually comes from the dev of development, and I ops from the operations. Okay, so that is the whole funda of DevOps. Now, what are the benefits of, like, DevOps? So faster deployment and better product delivery, promotes agility in our business, more stable operating environments, better resource utilization, better scalability and availability, automation, faster issue resolution. Okay. Again, rather by going point to point, just tell me that what are the things that you observed here which could be, like, a benefit. Resource utilization, right? Your development team doesn't have to care about all the deployments, because DevOps team is there to take care of it, right? So you are saving the development team's time, correct? That's point number one. The deployment is faster. Of course it is faster, right? Because just imagine that whatever you have developed here, you're not going to do the same development into the QA environment, right? Because you will have a pipeline in your DevOps tool, which can actually, like, everybody who is working on in this environment, they can do their own commit and push to the same branch that they have created, right? So every merge is flawless, right? And everything can be all together, can be pushed to another environment, correct? So it is, of course it is faster. And any kind of tracking. Okay, let's say if, for example, let's say if there is any issue or defect that comes in the live environment, now this team is concerned, or your manager or your team lead is concerned, that, what, I want to know who has done these changes. So let's say if there are only two changes, it will be easier to remember that who has done what. But let's say if your development team is pretty big, right, 5 or 10 people, you will not remember that who has worked on what, correct? But maintaining these branches, okay, if there is a code repo, okay, there is a repository that has been maintained, you can actually go to your tool, you can open that repository, and you can, let's say if there is a class on which you want to know that who has done that particular line of code change, you can check the history of the class and you will understand that who has, because that tool will maintain that who has done those changes. All right. So these kind of tracking things also becomes easier, and you're also maintaining every version, right, of your, like, code or code repo, like, whatever you are maintaining, it is really maintainable, right? Because DevOps team is already, like, monitoring all these activities, and the tool is helping them basically to better organize it, right? So these are the benefits that, like, DevOps, like, by having a DevOps team you can have, right? More stable operating environment, of course, like, whatever the operations or maintenance you're working, or whatever development you're working, it is more organized, it is more stable, because there is a proper structure, there's a proper process that you're following, correct? And then automation, of course, because even the DevOps team is not going to, like, manually merge these codes to another environment, okay? Because this tool will actually help them to just, like, create a package and just select the target branch, and the deployment will start automatically. So that kind of automation is also in the picture, right? Don't worry about all these things. As I said, you will understand it once we start understanding that how it actually works from the second video. Okay, so don't worry about that. You will have a better picture of these things. Faster issue resolution, of course, if the DevOps team is monitoring everything, then of course they will know that where the issue is, right? They will be able to monitor that any kind of error or any kind of misses that was there, right? So they can inform the development team that, you know what, this particular thing is failing because you have missed this is what the error says. They would know better to how to read the errors, and then they can inform back the development team so that the development team can fix and recommit or repush the code. All right, so these kind of benefits are there. I'm not stressing very much because this is just the theory part, and I think the more you learn about it, the more you will understand that what are the benefits, right? There is no point of actually memorizing these stuff. All right, so this was the basic introduction of what a DevOps team does. And going with the second video, I'm going to start with the account creation in Azure DevOps. So if you're learning Azure DevOps, I think it is going to be really beneficial for you, because I'm going to cover each and every topic, starting with how Azure DevOps tool works, how you can create a board, how you can create a what is a sprint, or what is a backlog, or what is a user story, all of those things, and how you can actually make use of Azure DevOps to better manage your stories, or product backlog. All right, and then also how to create a pipeline, how to commit and push your code. So all of that will be covered. Don't worry about it. Just be consistent, go slow, and learn each and every concept. Do not stress more about the theory. I do not really believe in actually memorizing any of these things. If you have the concepts clear in mind, then I think it will be easier for you to actually catch up with each and every topic that I'll teach. All right, so this was all about introduction to DevOps, and I'll see you in the next session. Thank you.